Hi, my name is Dennis and welcome to my new video, which will be a bit less technical than my usual Databricks videos. In this video, I really want to talk a bit more about my career and more specifically how I got into data from a very unlikely beginning point, how I evolved my career over the last 6 years, including having both employed positions, but also spending 2/3, so 4 years out of 6, working as a freelancer and a contractor. In fact, I'm at the time of making this video, I've been self-employed for about 2 years, and currently I see no reason to go back to an employed position. So let me tell you my story of how I got there. I graduated in 2018, which was a while ago, with a degree in materials science and materials engineering, with a minor in chemical engineering from KU Leuven in Belgium. I remember in my last year I did an exchange year, which means I spent the entire 12 months abroad in France at the University of Grenoble for 5 months, which landed me an internship position of 6 months at a factory in the French Alps that produced liquid aluminium. And this internship was hugely important in what would eventually become my career in data, because that's the first point I was really interacting with data. And it all came to pass because of a program language you may be familiar with called R. We briefly had a couple of courses at university. It was actually in economics where we used R to analyze some economical data. I didn't really think much of it because I was never really interested in programming. I was always very interested in physics, chemistry, and other sciences. For me, programming in Python was actually annoying and never really enjoyed that particular course at uni, so I wasn't particularly good at any at programming. But at that internship, when I started working, the main objective I really did was analyze lots of data coming from a SQL Server database. And this really got me in touch with the programming language, well, I should say query language SQL or SQL, as we say in Europe. And I spent, in essence, the next 6 months writing SQL queries, pumping that data into R and R Studio, and making a lot of visual, nice graphs. And my colleagues who hired me at the internship saw that I was able to produce beautiful graphs in a fraction of the time that they could. Eventually, I started to get more and more work in data analysis. I discovered that there was an entire field that was coming up at that time. It was data science, which I think was in full swing around 2018 and 19. So I kind of rode this hype wave until I completed some courses on Coursera on machine learning. And that's basically my first steps into the data world. So after that, I was hired by the same company I did an internship at. The company was called Trimet. They had their headquarters in Essen, Germany. And they offered me a job there as a process engineer. I happily took this job because, in essence, the city of Essen was only 2 hours away from my home in Belgium, which meant that I could prolong my, let's say, European travels by another year or two, right? I would not have to go back to Belgium to where I knew everything and everyone already. So that opportunity really excited me. My job itself as a process engineer was more focused on process control. I was developing a new control system using MATLAB and Simulink, which eventually got me a bit away from the field of data. I still did a lot of data analysis. I discovered that Python was actually beating R in terms of importance, especially in the field of machine learning, which is why I picked up Python mostly on the side. So on the job, I was using a lot of R. I remember in the evenings, I spent a lot of time doing courses Python, seeing how all of that works. Nevertheless, after about 1.5 years at this company in Essen, I got a bit frustrated that most of my day job was actually not revolving around data or machine learning. I really wanted to get deeper into that field, which is why in 2020, right before the start of COVID in March, I remember that month quite well, I found a new job. It was at a data science consultancy company called Statworks. And they hired me because they saw I had this intense passion for data and machine learning. They gave me a small case, which I managed to solve quite well. And they were really impressed by my motivation that showed itself in, for instance, competing in Kaggle competitions and so on. Kaggle was a website for machine learning games and competitions online. I'm not sure if it's still very popular, but at those days it was like a way to prove your finesse and your dexterity in machine learning. So there I was hired as a what they call junior data science consultant. And in essence, I would be staffed on various machine learning projects at clients. Unfortunately, because it was COVID, we all soon went into what the Germans call Kurzarbeit. In essence, it means that you're only employed at 50%, so you only work half a week. Nevertheless, Statworks was so nice to pay us the full salary, which essentially meant that I had half of the week completely to myself. And I remember really investing that time, getting really deep into machine learning, and more specifically, deep learning, which was becoming very popular at that time, especially for applications in computer vision and natural language processing. So, as part of that journey, I in fact quickly discovered that to do lots of machine learning fast, but also cheap, you need a workstation. And that's how I spent the next 2 months assembling hardware. I fell into the rabbit hole of computer building, which means choosing a good CPU, choosing the correct graphical card, which was really the main component. At that time, I purchased the 2080 Ti by NVIDIA, which was a very powerful card, also very expensive at that time, and which allowed me to train some pretty big, intricate machine learning models that I used for my Kaggle competitions. I remember particularly competing in the Kaggle steel defect detection competition and got there in the top 20%, which by all means is not very impressive, but it's something I was very proud of. In essence, competing on Kaggle is what eventually led me to switch from R completely to Python and learning the language completely by doing. I never followed any courses on Python, didn't really study any books, but just by writing all of this code and understanding the machine learning frameworks allowed me to master the language. At the time, I was also reached out by a former colleague who worked with me at Trimet. My first job was an engineer in Essen, and he was still very impressed by my ability in R, and he knew that I was able to produce nice graphs and applications quickly. And given that he was a freelancer, he worked at he had a particular project for that same company in a different division, and he desperately needed a tool that would allow him to visualize a lot of signals coming from an industrial controller in one dashboard. And he didn't really want to spend a lot of time buying an expensive tool or doing things himself. So he reached out to me with an idea that, hey, Dennis, would you like to try to build an app for me as a freelancer? And I've always wanted to be more independent of my employer, be more entrepreneurial. And this first project really gave me the opportunity to dip my toes into freelancing. I had additional time. I had already a steady source of income from my job. And now I was able to earn, I think, 1.5k euros to build a nice application in R, which was still one of my favorite language. So I took this opportunity with both hands, built the application, spent way too much time on it, but it felt so satisfying delivering a project from end start to end without having someone looking over your shoulder, no status meetings, no agile meetings, dailies. You just promise the work, agree on the scope, and then deliver it at a fixed price. And this way of working appealed to me so much that already just 6 months into my new data consultancy job in Frankfurt, I quit the job and decided to freelance full time. At that time, that was quite a bold decision because, as you remember, COVID was still in full swing. Companies were losing money. Everyone was afraid. Nevertheless, I've built up a nice nest egg because I've always saved a lot of money instead of spending it. And now, essentially, I was completely unemployed. I opened a freelancing business in Germany and was now looking for new clients to do. Unfortunately, my colleague did not need any additional work. So I was in fact spending, I think it took me at least 2 or 3 months before I found my next contract. My next contract was actually not in R and not in machine learning. It was in a Python framework called Apache Airflow. Now, Apache Airflow was a framework that I was studying a bit on the side during my second job at Statworks, and also during the first months of my freelancing when I still had no clients. I was really fascinated by the aspect of having a clear, organized way of building data pipelines, essentially batch processing scheduled by a workflow orchestrator like Apache Airflow. And by mere chance, on some, I think it's called a contractor or contracting company, I saw a project of a startup in Cologne that needed someone who could help them implement Apache Airflow. So I applied for that job, had I think 1 or 2 interviews with their team, and they liked me. And so they hired me as a freelancer, or I should say more of a contractor. And this was quite exciting because this was my first real contracting gig with a company that I couldn't get through via my own network. This was really a cold contact. I worked for them for about 6 months, I think, delivered a project, installed Apache Airflow. I also worked quite a bit with Apache Kafka at that time because they were an IoT startup that really wanted to experiment with real-time communication via messaging frameworks. So I did that for a while. By now we are reaching the end of 2020, and at the beginning of 2021, I actually returned to Belgium and opened an LLC, so a limited liability company, because my freelancing business was growing. I realized that I want to do this further, I want to contract more, and I needed a company to do this to be able to secure bigger clients. So I moved back to Belgium, continued working for that client, for that particular startup, but was also looking for new additional work. And the next project that I actually landed was for a very big company. It was Johnson & Johnson in Belgium, so a big pharma industry. This was also quite a big step for me because I left the world of medium-sized companies and small-sized companies and started working for enterprise clients. And I very soon became familiar with the particular challenges of enterprise, being that you have very large meetings, often not that much time for coding, you have a lot of different people, and the scope of the work is so big that you can essentially don't grasp it all. So it's as if you're all working on different parts of a big elephant. Someone's working on the trunk, someone is feeling the leg, the other one is working on the tail, but no one has the view on the entire elephant very often. This was a real contracting position, which means that I got there via a contracting company. It was a data engineering company that found me. I was looking for an additional body or hands on the keyboard to put on this project. So they were acting like an intermediary, receiving a part of my daily rate. Now, although the pay was good, the framework that we were working on was also very interesting. It was called Kedro, essentially a PySpark framework for machine learning on very big data. I did that for a while, but very quickly got frustrated by the many meetings and the fact that I've lost the initial freedom I gained by freelancing. I suddenly had working hours, meetings, Scrum updates. So all the benefits of being a freelancer were no longer there. I was essentially a full-time contractor. The second thing I also didn't really like was that I left the manufacturing world. I was no longer in industry. And coming from the aluminum sector, being a materials engineer or a metals engineer to be more specific, I really missed the chemistry, the physics, the dust, the heat from my previous factory jobs. I wanted to work more on industrial use cases. So I did that contract for I think about a year and a half until I got a very interesting email. We are now at the beginning of 2022, in the middle. I was I was contacted by a German headhunting bureau that were looking for a data engineer who had some experience in aluminum. At that time, a company called Novelis, it was I guess still is the world leader in rolling and recycling. They were looking for a data engineer to work on their machine learning projects in Germany. And given that I by then spoke German, I had experience in manufacturing and even in aluminum, and I had data engineering experience from my last contracting gig in Apache Airflow, which meant I knew Spark, I knew Databricks. I was hired as a data engineer. Unfortunately, this meant that I had to close my freelancing business. At that point, I was also ready to throw in the towel. I think I got a bit impatient and frustrated with the fact that I wasn't really a freelancer, I wasn't really free. And I had this imposter syndrome where I felt that, you know what, Dennis, maybe you need more experience in data before you can actually be a freelancer. So I closed my business in Belgium, relocated to Germany, got a very good high-paying job as an employee for this company. It was fully remote. I was living in Berlin at that time. Well, I did actually spend 6 months at the factory in Koblenz, which was a deal with the company that I would spend 6 months on site to learn the business, and then I could work remote from anywhere based in Germany, and I chose Berlin. At that company, I did quite interesting projects. I was part of a very smart team of data scientists, and I was there tasked to prepare the data pretty much completely in Databricks. So I wrote a lot of Spark code, did notebook orchestration, creation of tables, medallion architecture, where you have the bronze, silver, and gold clean layers, and generally passed on my knowledge to a junior data engineer who was also employed next to me. And that was my first experience really coaching junior people, and I really enjoyed it. It was fun to not only consume knowledge, but also be able to pass it on to someone else. Even though I liked the job, I again very quickly noticed that I was just not built to be an employee. I really missed having the independence that freelancing gave me. I was also a bit frustrated by the approach of the company when it came to data ingestion of sensor data, which was this topic is perhaps a bit more too deep to explore in this video, but let's say that a particular challenge in manufacturing, which actually forced me to take my next step, which I will get to. A big challenge in manufacturing is that there's a very high volume of time series data. You have to know a factory is equipped with many, many sensors. All of these sensors produce data in sometimes 20 millisecond frequency, but let's assume even if it's 1 second frequency, you're dealing with a lot of time series generated every single moment. And processing this data is not as straightforward as processing sales data or customer data that, for example, Nike would be tasked. And at that time, I discovered, let's say, the field of industrial IoT. So it's a bit similar to what I did for my first startup gig when I did Apache Airflow work, but there it was more focused on a concept called the unified namespace. And the unified namespace was a concept developed by Walker Reynolds in the United States. It was essentially an event-driven architecture based on the MQTT protocol, It's a very lightweight protocol, very commonly used in IoT applications because it allows to transport data over insecure or unstable networks in very large volumes. It has a very small memory footprint. But I got really upset by this technology because I thought that, look, this architecture is a solution to industrial data infrastructure, in fact. So what a lot of companies, including Novelis, was really struggling with, I felt that the unified namespace was the solution. So as an employee, I really tried to push this concept in the company. And yeah, of course, I got some interest, some traction. I could do it as, let's say, as a side project, but the whole strategy of the company was set in stone. Essentially, what usually happens in a big enterprise, some big consultants come in, they develop a fancy 5-year-old big plan, and then the company executes that. So I quickly realized that there was no way the company would take a big risk like that and explore this new technology. So I felt that if I really wanted to work on this thing called the unified namespace, I would have to go and work as a freelancer again, which meant that for I think the fourth time now, I quit my job. I resigned, which troubled the company very much. They really tried to keep me there because my work was generally good. It was also very hard to hire competent data engineers at that time. Nevertheless, in July 2023, I resigned from this job and started to work as a freelancer again. Again, at this time I was in Berlin, so in Germany. So I reopened a freelancing business in Germany, and I even got 6 months of funding because I managed to, let's say, create a very coherent business plan of serving the aluminum industry in digital transformation. That was to be my business venture. I would specialize on the aluminum industry and focus on data integration using the unified namespace. And I really hoped that my previous background in aluminum or aluminium, depending where you're from, and data would allow me to build systems completely on my own for this industry. I now realize that it's quite a naive venture, that even though it's quite niche, it's a very conservative industry. And I tried to build a business out of this for 2 years. So I focused really hard on conferences. I flew to two conferences in the aluminum industry, so once a year. Once it was in Dubai, and the second time was in Lyon in France. Shook a lot of hands, talked to a lot of people. I even flew to a conference in Istanbul where I presented the unified namespace for the aluminum industry. I wrote quite a lot of blog posts and quite a lot of articles in industrial magazines. I had a blog, I had a daily newsletter. I also got in touch with a company called the United Manufacturing Hub in Germany that was a company that open sourced a unified namespace for the industry. I worked with them briefly as a content creator, but after 2 years, I just noticed that you have to remember my background was always in data, so machine learning, data analysis, analytics, data engineering, and I felt I was drifting very far away into IIoT. I was now dealing with integrating data from controllers, from industrial SCADA systems, which stands for supervisory control and data acquisition, and I felt I was going too broad. And quite recently, actually, I would say about a month ago, I secured my next gig, which was for a big renewables company, again, a German company. I have to mention in the fact that I frankly also returned to Belgium again. I from Berlin, that was in September 2024, so last year. I reopened a business in Belgium because I figured that I wanted to focus my life in Belgium in the long run, that I would eventually return there. I was also quite done with Germany, and I found a very good contract through this Belgian LLC, through a large recruiting company called Hayes, who offered me, who saw that I had experience in data engineering, especially in SCADA systems and manufacturing. And they needed someone that could build a data quality framework built on Databricks. And that's how I actually got back into Databricks. I saw that the old world which I've left, namely data, and ventured into manufacturing, suddenly showed itself back to me. I was working once again with PySpark in Databricks and really enjoyed it. Which is why I now decided to focus my career more on a specific platform instead of a particular niche like aluminum or manufacturing or even unified namespace. I felt this industry will need a couple more years to really implement this technology. But for me, I wanted to work on something that was already booming. And the conference, the Databricks conference, which I will be going to in June in San Francisco, has 60,000 attendees, which made me realize that I think Databricks is a technology that is going to stay. It's a good product. It's a good product. They make the whole data, let's say, product lifecycle very easy because they do the data management, the processing, the model serving. Databricks can do it all eventually, which is why I decided to focus my career, let's say, or my freelancing business on Databricks. I'm continuously working on various subfields such as data integration into Databricks from SCADA systems, data quality, PySpark and processing, data visualization. So all the various experiences I've built over the last 5 years, I feel that they come nicely together in this new focus, Databricks, which I'm currently exploring. So that's where I'm currently at. Um, let's look at what the future holds and what I learned from the past. First of all, I thought that having a degree in data was, well, it was first of all impossible. At that time, 2018, there weren't really any data science university roles. Sure, there were some boot camps. I never did those, though. I felt that you can get quite far by still learning by yourself. Whether that's still true today, I don't know, but it worked for me at that time. I also realized that it's fine to look for yourself and what you want to do in the first, let's say, 5 or even 10 years of your career. I mean, I went from process engineering from MATLAB and Simulink to SQL queries to R, Python, to playing with machine learning on Kaggle, to going more into data engineering and PySpark, Databricks, going to manufacturing into MQTT and unified namespace, and now back into Databricks. And I felt that all the things I've learned were all very relevant to my work now. So I think at some point it's just about sticking with something long enough. Even though I've jumped ships very long, I've never had a job for 2 years. I've always quit before that mark, was never promoted, but still I did really well because in the long term, if you look at my career, data has been the central point of it all. I've approached it from a different direction, sometimes more from analytics, sometimes more from engineering, but I've always worked a lot with data. And I've always focused on the fundamentals, things like SQL, writing with Python code, but also exploring certain frameworks. So what do I hope you get from this video? I think from this video, it was more, maybe even for me, just to say that it's fine to look for your way. I think it's also fine to just follow your intuition. And as long as you put in the work and learn, you will be fine. Even now, 2025, when people say that the market is crashing and tech jobs are decreasing, I haven't really felt a lack of potential work. Sure, I've had like months before where I was looking in between projects for work, but I've always felt that if you know what you're doing and you can create value for a company, you'll never be out of business. Maybe a final tip I would give you as a viewer is that even now, even though I'm back focusing on Databricks, I'm always very focused on one particular industry. Like I try to avoid working for, let's say, Nike or Facebook or anything else, given that I've worked in manufacturing for 5 years and industry in general. I'm still very focused on serving either manufacturing or utilities or chemical companies, essentially anything within the industry. This really allows me to set me apart from other freelancers and eventually build experience in a particular niche. So I think that's it for this video. Thank you for hearing me ramble about my career. I hope it was useful for you. For me, it was nice to revisit the last 6 years of my career. And I'm quite excited about what's to come on the future, and anything interesting I will share with you on my channel. Thank you and bye bye.